There are moments in life when it feels like defeat, when walking away feels like losing, like breaking. But what if that very it was never a retreat, but a release? What if the moment they let you go, the moment they underestimated your worth, was the moment heaven stepped in? You didn't just leave a place, a person, or a chapter. You made space, and in that sacred space of absence, God didn't just observe, He moved. He entered the scene that your pain had cleared. What they thought was your fall was actually your rise in disguise. Because where human hands let go, divine hands began to build. Your absence didn't echo with regret, it roared with purpose. Your exit wasn't weakness, it was alignment. It was destiny opening a door that only loss could unlock. Painful exits are divine turning points. Sometimes the ending you didn't want becomes the beginning you deeply needed. We don't always recognize it in the moment, especially when the pain is fresh and the silence after someone's departure feels unbearable. Whether you walked away or were left behind, the experience often brings a profound sense of loss. But what if that loss was the beginning of a higher plan, one that could not unfold until that specific chapter closed? Life has a mysterious way of removing us from what no longer serves our growth. It doesn't always ask for our permission. It doesn't always come with explanations. When you're pushed out of a situation, be it a relationship, a role, or even a version of yourself, it feels like something is being taken from you. But in reality, something sacred is being returned to you. The space to rediscover your own voice, your worth, your direction. We often hold onto familiarity because it comforts us, even when it's quietly draining us. Sometimes we beg to stay in rooms where our presence is no longer valued, and in doing so, we delay our own transformation. The discomfort of that exit, the pain that followed it, wasn't punishment, it was preparation. You weren't being broken, you were being reshaped for something greater than you could see. There are doors that only open after you leave the one that locked you in. And sometimes God doesn't walk in until everything else walks out. When the room empties, that's when the divine enters, not to fill the space with noise, but to fill it with clarity. The silence after your exit may have seemed empty, but it was full of meaning. You just weren't still enough to hear it yet. Pain is not always destruction. Sometimes it's instruction. It strips away the illusions we built around people, places, and roles that we thought defined us. It exposes the truth beneath what was comfortable but false. And in that moment, something shifts. The same door that seemed like a dead end becomes a passage to a place of deeper understanding and peace. What looked like a dismissal was actually a redirection. What you thought was rejection was divine realignment. People may have closed the door, but they didn't know that by doing so, they were making room for something sacred to enter your life. Your exit wasn't just necessary, it was destined. Sometimes we only see the hand of God in hindsight, but if you look back now, you'll notice that the ending that shook you was also the moment when life started guiding you. Not loudly, not through sudden miracles, but through the quiet rearranging of circumstances that led you to heal, to grow, and to reclaim your worth. That's the paradox. The worst moment became the turning point. Your exit made way for something your presence couldn't invite. That's not weakness, that's wisdom, that's not failure, that's divine timing. Your exit was not the end, it was the invitation. The void you left became sacred ground when you stepped away, whether by choice or by force. It felt like a rupture. Something was torn, a space opened. You may have believed that your absence would go unnoticed, that the world you walked out of would simply move on. But it didn't. Something shifted the moment you were no longer there. The void you left wasn't empty. It was powerful. It was necessary. It became the very space where truth began to unfold. Often, we underestimate the weight of our presence. We don't see how much light we carry until we remove ourselves from the place where it was taken for granted. The silence that follows your exit speaks louder than any confrontation could. Because when you stop showing up for people who depended on your energy without ever nurturing it, the silence starts echoing, and that echo begins to reveal everything that was hidden when you were still standing in the room. People don't always notice what they had until it's gone. That's not just a saying, it's a pattern of human behavior. We tend to normalize the extraordinary until it's removed. You gave, you tried, you stayed. But the longer you remained, the more your value was blurred by familiarity. Only when you left did the weight of your absence start to settle in. And in that weight, reflection was born. The place where you once poured your loyalty, your love, and your strength, once emptied, became a mirror. Not for you, but for them. And what they saw wasn't just an empty seat or a missing voice. They saw the truth of what they mishandled. Your absence forced a confrontation with reality, not in anger, not in revenge, but in silence. And silence often speaks with the voice of consequence, but here's the deeper part. They weren't the only ones who needed that silence. You did too. You needed the distance to finally hear your own thoughts without interference. You needed that void to begin rebuilding what was slowly eroded by compromise. The sacred ground wasn't just formed where you left. It was also forming within you. You were not escaping. You were entering a sanctuary that had been waiting for your presence all along. Sometimes, the space you leave behind becomes a sacred lesson for others. But more importantly, it becomes sacred ground for your own transformation. Because you stopped filling a space that was draining you, you made room for clarity to enter. Because you walked away, the healing could begin, not just for others, but for yourself. It's hard to believe that something good can come from absence. We often associate loss with weakness. But what if letting go was the bravest thing you ever did? What if leaving wasn't the end of the story, but the chapter where purpose began to write itself? The void didn't stay empty. It became a place of reckoning. It became a place of truth. And eventually, it became the doorway through which peace, perspective, and power walked in. Suffering as spiritual recalibration, there is a kind of pain that doesn't just hurt. It awakens. It shakes the very foundation of what we thought we knew, what we trusted, what we believed we needed. This type of suffering doesn't come to destroy. It arrives to reveal. It takes what is unstable and exposes it. It unmasks the comfort that was actually keeping us stuck. And in doing so, it begins the slow, sacred process of recalibration. At first, suffering feels like punishment. We ask why. We wonder what went wrong or what we did to deserve such a fall. But over time, if we allow ourselves to sit with the pain without running from it, we begin to see it differently. We begin to understand that suffering isn't always a sign that something is broken in us. Often, it's a sign that something false is breaking away from us. It hurts to outgrow the spaces we once loved. It's confusing when the people we once trusted turn silent. But these moments aren't meant to destroy our identity. They're meant to return us to it. Pain has a way of burning away the excess, the noise, the masks, the illusions, and leaving behind only what is real. That process doesn't happen in comfort. It happens in the dark night of the soul, where distractions fall away and the truth starts to whisper. We don't often choose the seasons of suffering, they choose us. But once they arrive, they offer us a gift, clarity, the kind of clarity that can't be taught in calm waters. When your heart is broken, your ego is stripped, and your plans fall apart. That's when your soul starts to speak. And what it says is often something you've been trying to avoid for years, that the life you were living was too small for who you truly are becoming. In suffering, you see your limits, but you also start to see your strength. You become aware of the patterns that once defined your responses. You notice the weight of everything you were carrying without realizing it, and slowly that awareness becomes transformation. You begin to move differently, speak differently, love differently, not out of bitterness but out of a deeper understanding of what really matters. Spiritual recalibration isn't always loud. It doesn't always come with lightning or signs. Sometimes it's a quiet, sacred shift within you, a moment where you realize you no longer fit into what you once begged to be part of, and that realization is painful, but it is also power. Your suffering didn't come to destroy you. It came to strip you of what was holding you back from becoming whole. It recalibrated your direction. It reset your boundaries. It revived your sense of meaning. And most of all, it opened space for something higher to enter. The same pain that made you question everything is now the reason you understand so much more. That isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of a deeper, more truthful one. And it began the moment you allowed the pain to teach, not just torment. Human rejection prepares for divine direction. Rejection is one of the most painful human experiences. Whether it comes from people you trusted, communities you gave your all to, or systems that never saw your worth, it leaves a mark. At first, it feels personal, as if you failed, as if something about you wasn't good enough. But with time and reflection, you begin to see that not all rejection is loss. Some rejection is redirection. When others turn away, it often forces you to turn inward. That inward turning is not weakness. It is the beginning of transformation. Many of the most meaningful shifts in life begin with being shut out of what we once thought we couldn't live without. It's only when certain doors close that we are finally willing to walk through the ones that have always been open within us, but overlooked. People will reject what they do not understand. They may dismiss your growth, your heart, your ideas, not because you were wrong, but because your presence challenged their comfort. And when that rejection happens, it's not a call to shrink. It's a call to rise differently. Sometimes you are not rejected because you're unworthy, but because your calling is too big to fit the place you were trying to belong to. Divine direction rarely comes in comfort. It often begins in crisis. The moment you're no longer accepted by what once felt like home, you begin to search for something more honest, something aligned with your soul rather than your survival. That search leads to clarity, and clarity leads to purpose. There is a wisdom that emerges when you've been pushed away. The very people who turned their backs may have unknowingly done you a favor. They cleared the noise. They removed the false support. And in that silence, you found space to reconnect with your inner compass. That compass doesn't point toward popularity or approval. It points toward authenticity, integrity, and peace. Divine direction is not about escape. It's about arrival. You don't just move away from the rejection. You move towards something higher, something deeper, something built not by human hands but by divine intention. The pain of being cast out becomes the foundation for your breakthrough, not just in the world around you, but in the way you see yourself. You begin to realize that your worth was never tied to their recognition. You were always more than what they could see. And when they rejected you, they weren't sending you away. They were positioning you for something greater. What looked like abandonment was alignment. What felt like failure was foundation. You were not being denied. You were being prepared, and once you see it, you can never go back. The path ahead is clearer. The voice within is stronger. The direction is no longer chosen out of fear, but led by conviction. And it all started with the rejection that broke you open, so something greater could guide you forward. Transformation begins in isolation. There's a silence that arrives after departure. Whether you walked away or were left behind, it's the kind of quiet that can feel almost unbearable at first. The absence of voices, the absence of affirmation, the absence of belonging. But that silence, though heavy, is not empty. It is where the real transformation begins. Isolation is not just about being alone. It is a sacred pause. It strips away distractions and reveals what has been ignored for too long. In the beginning, it can feel like exile. You find yourself outside the familiar, far from the people and places that once gave you comfort. But in that unfamiliar space, something deeper starts to awaken. The very parts of you that were overshadowed by the noise of others begin to breathe again. The world often teaches us to stay busy, to stay connected, to never be alone with our own thoughts, but the soul knows better. The soul knows that there are things only silence can teach. When you're removed from the crowd, you're finally able to hear what's been whispering inside you all along, the questions you've buried, the dreams you postponed, the truths you were afraid to speak. In isolation, these rise to the surface, not to harm you, but to heal you. Transformation doesn't usually happen in public. It's forged in private spaces, in the quiet corners of our hearts. When no one is watching, that's when you meet the version of yourself you've been running from or neglecting. You begin to rebuild, not from the expectations of others, but from the ground of your own truth. Slowly, gently, and sometimes painfully, you begin to see who you were meant to be all along. There is something powerful about having no one to impress. There is clarity in not being seen by the wrong eyes. In that solitude, your intentions become pure. Your movements become more intentional. You no longer seek validation from places that once drained you. You begin to recognize the difference between company and connection, between attention and understanding. Isolation doesn't mean you are forgotten. It means you are being refined. What looks like separation is often protection. Life removes you from environments that no longer align with your growth. It places you in the wilderness, not to punish, but to prepare. And when the preparation is complete, you emerge not as a victim of rejection, but as a vessel of purpose. You don't come back the same. You return with depth, with wisdom, with a quiet confidence that doesn't need approval. You walk differently because you've been somewhere others haven't. You carry something that noise could never give you, peace born from clarity. So if you find yourself alone after the exit, know this: you're not lost. You're being rebuilt in silence so you can rise in strength. This is where the real change begins, not in the crowd, not in their applause, but in the stillness where God meets you and shapes you for what's next.